Welcome to On the Same Page. We're here at River Market Books and Gifts in the Cox Creative Center here in downtown Little Rock. The program, If All Arkansas Read the Same Book, is coming around again. It is sponsored by the Center for the Book at the Arkansas State Library. This year the selection is The House on Mango Street. We're going to sit down, have a discussion with the author, and then sit down with some of your fellow readers and discuss The House on Mango Street, coming up on the Same Page. Sandra Cisneros joins us now. She grew up in Chicago, Illinois. She has a BA in English from Loyola University, went to the Masters Iowa Writers Workshop, winner of a Penn Award for fiction, a number of books, acclaimed books, including The Bad Boys, Woman Hollering Creek, Caramello, which the sales of which rank her as the #1 selling Latina author in the United States, and The House on Mango Street is what we're going to talk about today. Thank you for your time today.
You're welcome.
For all of our readers in Arkansas who are going to pick up this book and read it, what would be helpful for them to know about you and your background?
Well, I think it would be helpful for them not to presume that House on Mango Street is autobiography. I think a lot of times people feel that it's so true that it happened to me. The way I write is I take things that happen to other people, and in the case of that book, it was my students, and I cut and paste from memory, from my mother's stories, from my memories, and I make a composite. So some of the stories are mine, but I have to say the emotions, they're all mine.
All right. And you say a lot of the stories from your students you were teaching at the time.
I was teaching high school dropouts. For a more expansive look at how I wrote the book, I have an essay that's in the hardback edition, in the anniversary edition of House on Mango Street, and I have a website under my name too, so the readers could look at that to kind of get a little bit of biographical data.
Before the book came out, and the book I guess is classified as fiction, you wrote mostly poetry. Do I understand that correctly?
I wrote poetry and short stories. I was trained as a poet. I taught myself to write fiction by trying to cross-pollinate poetry and fiction and put them together. I wanted to write a book that you can open any place and just read one, or you could read from left to the right and get another story. I think people are very busy, and I think especially working class people don't have a lot of time, so I wanted to give them something that had the brevity and the lyricism of poetry and the power of poetry, but a story that wouldn't terrify them, because sometimes when we open a book of poetry we think, oh, I can't read that, or I don't know what they're talking about. But if you see a little story that's a paragraph long, it's less threatening, less intimidating. So my design was to write something that a lady at Dunkin' Donuts who gives you the change could read, or a bus driver could read it, or a taxi cab driver. And actually all of those people have read the book now and have told me they've enjoyed it, so it reached its aim.
And that is the form that The House on Mango Street takes. And is there a technical name for this style of writing?
Yes,
would you call
actually,
it vignettes?
when I began them, I was calling them vignettes, but it's actually a story cycle. And there are cultures that have story cycles, of course, like the mythology in India. The Native Americans have seasonal story cycles. I didn't know about these models when I was writing the book. I thought I was just doing a little series of vignettes, but it's a novel.
You didn't know that it had a historical precedent.
No, I was looking at writers like Latin American writers like Jorge Luis Borges, who writes short stories but also writes poetry. And then he did these little vignettes in a book called Dream Tigers that the University of Texas published when he was visiting there. And that book had, to me, the best of poetry and fiction. You know, the brevity of poetry, the lyricism, but, you know, it's just all in one page. And I was using that as a model.
The stories, the vignettes, all seen through the eyes of the protagonist, who's Esperanza Cordero. Who is she?
Well, in real life, I'd have to say it was a very powerless and sad English teacher, me, in my 20s, disguised in the voice of a younger woman. I began it in Iowa when I think I realized my class difference from my wealthier classmates. It began from an autobiographical emotion, because my pieces always come from an emotion, and the emotion was shame. Once I realized my class difference, I felt ashamed about being in the graduate program, and I felt like quitting. And fortunately, I didn't. And after you get through being ashamed, then you get angry, and I used that anger to create House on Mungo Street. And fortunately, I didn't stay angry. And many years later, I started incorporating the stories of my students so that the book became a piece of fiction and not a memoir.
The narrator sees and perceives in a way that's very entertaining, it's insightful, it's depressing at some point, and that's part of the style that I guess you are known for.
Well,
how would you describe it? How has that style evolved?
You know, if you're a teacher working with no money, where you have to bring your own chalk and your own paper to the class, and you've got no supplies, and your students' lives are miserable, and you want to rescue them, what do? You know, there's a lot of teachers out there right now living this situation. I felt powerless to save my women students and my male students from the daily beatings life was going to give them. I was teaching them how to write poetry and fiction and teaching them literature, and I thought, how is that going to make them live a better life and help them find a job? You know, I was really worried about them. So I took all of their stories and put it into this book, not knowing that years later this book was going to make its way back to that very school and change people's lives. I wrote it from my heart, you know, just because I felt so impotent as a teacher, and I had no idea that it was going to have this resonance and go out and be doing the work that it's doing, which is really to make change, to change a person's life, to make you maybe save your own life, because there are very destructive moments in our lives, you know, when we just feel like you can't go on one day more. So I put all of that and all of those questions and those grimness and the joys and the wonderful things of life into the story, and I just wrote it so I could go to sleep at night.
It really is remarkable. The 44, did you say, vignettes?
I never counted them. Okay. You tell me.
I think it's around 44. Some of them include those moments you talk about, those very destructive moments, dramatic moments, big happenings in the life of the main character. Some of the vignettes are as simple as literally tying your shoe. I mean, the very most everyday things. Yeah. I guess the trick was to put them together and juxtapose them in just the way that the whole is really something that's greater than
well,
all the parts.
They look simple, but they were hard to write.
They don't look simple at all to me.
They're hard to write. They're like writing a poem, and I felt that people deserve the highest and the best art, especially people that work for a living and work really hard with their hands and their bodies and come home exhausted. So I wanted to make a book where they could just read one and make it beautiful. And I used all of my training from all the books I've ever loved, whether it's Hans Christian Andersen or Latin American writers like Juan Rulfo, Borges. I wanted to write something that was exquisite and as beautiful as high literature, but written in a language that anyone could understand. And so I took the opposite of the voice that I saw in the academy, the opposite of the voice I saw of my classmates in the poetry workshop, and that was a working class girl, a poor girl, and use her voice so that people wouldn't be frightened off by the stories.
Her voice is the main storytelling tool. The characters are so important. The people, the neighbors, the friends, the people on the street, the people she knows, the people she doesn't know. The book has been praised because of the attention to community rather than self-examination, which I guess at that time many of your peers were into, your writing peers.
You know, I got very frustrated at the University of Iowa because I never was taught that we could change and make our world better by what we did with our writing. It was very much, examining our own navel rather than looking out and saying, what can we do that can make our community better with our writing? How can we use our art to serve our community? That was never a question of making social change, of writing something that could save people's lives, that could fill them with hope, and that could make a bad situation better. But I learned so much being out in the field as an English teacher with high school dropouts. And I encourage young people, writers, to do some volunteer work to whatever their community is. And it may be that your community is, working with handicapped children or working at a hospice for people who have AIDS. Whatever it is that is your community, the more volunteer work you do, I really feel that you get rewarded in ways that money can't reward you. And I was hoping that the writing will allow people to see themselves in people most unlike themselves. The most beautiful letter I ever got was from a man in New York who was in a subway train, and he said that he saw people on the train that were like my characters, and he recognized himself. And to me, that's the real power of literature, if you can see yourself in the person most unlike yourself.
They say if you take a really great painting and turn it upside down, it still has power and it still has impact, just because of the artist's sense. I see that in these vignettes. I mean, and that was part of that was your intention, as you say, to be able to pick it up anywhere in the book. And does that come from your poetry background? Does it come from constructing pages like that?
Yeah, it comes from poetry. It comes from my love of poetry and of the power of a small little bit of writing to, just make your heart sing. I tried to do that with the vignettes.
I think it's accomplished in the book. Now,
Thank
these
you.
many years later, when you pick up the book and read it, how do you feel?
Well, I'm going to be 50 this year, and I wrote that in my 20s, and the book is doing the work that I wanted it to do, which is to, give direction to young people and give hope to young girls who are in leading self-destructive lives. I see stories I wish I could have written better. I think we all feel that way as writers. I look at them and I go, oh, that one's good. That one has stood the test of time. I want to do this one a little bit differently now. But I don't have an intention to rewrite it. A lot of those stories I've reworked in my new novel, Caramelo.
Mm-hmm.
So they're kind of bookends to each other.
So check that out if you want to see them.
Yeah, if you'd like to see what happened next,
Yeah.
because people do write to me and say, what happened next? So read Caramelo.
So you may want to turn me down on this, but we sometimes ask our authors to read a bit. Would you mind reading one of the things?
Yeah, absolutely.
You would? How about Four Skinny Trees?
Yeah. I used to have a bedroom that was right above the door when I lived in the house that this is based on. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have any privacy. I had a bedroom, but I had a door that wouldn't close because we had a big dresser that we bought at the Sears basement, mm-hmm. and it was longer than the space on the wall, so the door could only close to the dresser. And late at night, I would just sit out by the screen in that window and look at the trees. And I wrote this remembering that time when I felt so lonely that the only person who understood me was a tree. Four skinny trees. They are the only ones who understand me. I am the only one who understands them. Four skinny trees with skinny necks and pointy elbows like mine. Four who do not belong here, but are here. Four raggedy excuses planted by the city. From our room, we can hear them, but Nenny just sleeps and doesn't appreciate these things. Their strength is secret. They send ferocious roots beneath the ground. They grow up and they grow down and grab the earth between their hairy toes and bite the sky with violent teeth and never quit their anger. This is how they keep. Let one forget his reason for being, they'd all droop like tulips in a glass, each with their arms around the other. Keep, 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 trees say when I sleep. They teach. When I am too sad and too skinny to keep keeping, when I am a tiny thing against so many bricks, then it is I look at trees when there is nothing left to look at on this street. Four who grew despite concrete. Four who reach and do not forget to reach. Four whose only reason is to be and be.
Four Skinny Trees from the house on Mango Street. Sandra Cisneros, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We'll take a quick break. We'll be back with our Arkansas readers to talk about the house on Mango Street, so stay with us. We are back with our readers, and we are back here at a different place now, that bookstore at Mountebank Place in Conway, Arkansas. I'd like to introduce you to the folks who we're going to discuss the house on Mango Street with. First up, Sarita Perez is a junior, just finished the junior year at Parkview High School, going to be a senior next year. Cecilia Garcia Garza is a housewife and a volunteer for several organizations in Central Arkansas. And Wayne Stingle, Dr. Wayne Stingle, is a professor of English at the University of Central Arkansas here in Conway. And well, you folks may not know this, but this book was actually the book for the program If All Arkansans Read the Same Book for the past year. So I'm just going to start by going around the horn and see if our readers here think this all Arkansans would be interested in this book. Cecilia, we'll start with you.
If all Arkansans will be interested in this book, I think so. As long as they start reading, because once you might not be familiar with the author or with the situations that she is exposing on this book, on this novel, short novel. But once you start reading the first vignette, and as she mentioned before, you can start in whatever page, and you immediately get engaged, and with the very soft narrative, the technique that she has, and the fact that these vignettes are very short, and that you can pick up the book at any time and put it down, and then when you come back, like restart on the same page, or just jump to another page. But it's very engaging, very easy to read, and in my case, like very easy to relate with many of the situations that she's describing.
And you say you might not be familiar with the situations, but a lot of the feelings and some of the situations are universal to all people from all cultures, right?
That's right, yes.
Sarita, what do you think about the book?
I think all Arkansans would find some identity with this book. Like the characters in here, I can't identify with their situations because I was never in poverty. I was never, in a lot of the situations they were in, and about the only thing we have in common on the surface is like maybe our race. But I find identity with a lot of the things that they think about, a lot of the things they look at, and I like that.
Yeah, a lot of growing up is the same no matter where you come from, right?
A lot of coming of age.
Yeah. Wayne, what do you think?
Well, I think absolutely, because I think one of the themes running throughout the book is clearly escape and aspiration. And however much Cisneros, our voice here, recognizes herself as part of the house on Mango Street, she wants to be far from that world or eventually go from that world. And yet, in the last vignettes of the story, I think she realizes that wherever you come from, you can completely cut your roots there, and that she will bring that world to wherever she goes. Also, at the end, there's something about coming back to Mango Street and freeing or liberating people who live there from that world. So, I don't know what Arkansans would feel about that, but I was very intrigued by what she said with you, Tommy, in the interview. This is a book that I think was very cleverly and very kind of brilliantly marketed for an audience that increasingly, like most of us, has less and less time. And you can go anywhere in this book and pick up any one of the vignettes, and although, as she called it, a story cycle, they are not related sequentially or even in any basic narrative form. So
It's not really, per se, a collection of short stories, is it? It is a form, and a form, as she mentioned, that goes back to storytelling traditions from hundreds of years ago. Do we see that much in literature today, Wayne?
Well, she used the term, Cisneros used the term story cycle. And to my mind, that registered stuff like things like Ernest Hemingway's In Our Time, or more contemporaneously, John Barth's Lost in the Funhouse. But yes and no. I mean, those are stories that sort of reverberate and boomerang off each other, and I'm not sure that she wants that same effect. So, that's up for grabs what she meant.
Sarita, let me ask you, were you kind of wanting, as you read through the book, to have it sort of form itself into a traditional narrative with a plot line that goes in a linear fashion and things get resolved in the end? Or did you like it just the way it is?
Actually, I really like the way she wrote it. I really like the form. It's like a large poem, very smooth. It's really easy to read, but without being really juvenile. And I'm really interested to read her other books because I'm sure she's grown as an author, but I really like the way she writes. I really like her descriptions in particular. Like in one part, she talks about how Esperanza's laughter is like a pile of dishes breaking. And when she talked about, what was it, 4 skinny trees, she described the trees of having some sort of secret power. And I really like just the images it provokes in my brain of these trees, which we think of as defenseless. We cut them down, use them for everything, have this power that we don't know about.
Yeah. Cecilia, I know you speak English and you speak Spanish as well. I'm curious to know whether you read it in the English version or the Spanish version.
I read it on the English version because I rather read it in the language that was created. And a while ago, I started reading the Spanish version, and it is like what I just read is pretty good. And then basically because Elena Poniatowska is great, the lady that was in charge of the translate the text. She is like a very talented writer, and she mentions that she has people helping her just to get the exact same meaning that Sandra Cisneros tried to give to any single vignette. Whatever I read in Spanish, I really like it.
Is the English that she writes in, does it seem a kind of hybrid English that's closer to Spanish forms, Spanish music? Did you feel, though you were reading in English, that there was, not just because of her ethnicity, but because of a consciousness about an immigrant world, or that she was writing close to a kind of a Spanish sense of things?
Funny that you mentioned it, because this is something that I talked to somebody else about. Although her English is excellent and impeccable, you can tell that maybe her maternal language is Spanish because of the way that she constructs some sentences, and she goes again and again retouching like with the initial subject, and also because of the way that she brushes with many different issues that we deal with on a daily basis, like the way that she brushes with death through different vignettes without the vignette being dedicated totally to the death of somebody. I find that very interesting, because we talk a lot about death, and it is something that you can see that is present on her writing.
Let me ask you this, and I couldn't quite figure this out. There seem to be a lot of references to the sky in the book. Poetic references to it, eating the sky. She has that. Is that something from the Spanish language, or the Spanish, or the Latino culture that I'm not familiar with? Is the sky a symbol for something else?
Yes, we use the sky for many different situations. Like, for example, when you are really in love with somebody and you call this somebody mi cielo, which is like you mean the sky to me, and
okay.
So. That can be something, and then there are other situations when you say you're never gonna get that. Is like as far as the sky, like situations like this. But it is very.
I saw
present.
it many times in the book, and I really am glad
Yes,
you could
it is.
enlighten us on that. Hey, one more question. I think we'd all agree that she has a tremendous power of recall. Although she said this is not an autobiographical book, it seems to me like she's having a sense memory of a lot of things that happened to her when she was growing up. She's really just amazing at it. I know you all would agree with that. Wayne, is that something a writer can learn to be better at, or is that sort of a trait? Is that something you're born with?
Well, I too, Tommy, like you, was a little bit not put off, but I was a little perplexed in the interview when one of the first words out of her mouth was
the first thing.
The first thing.
Yeah.
Was to clarify her distance from this as autobiography. And she bent over backwards to say it's not that, it's but I didn't understand her answer to that. I mean, because how to answer your question? I think that memory is so potent for so many writers that they feel after a point that their memory is not only an individual thing, but a collective thing and a culturally conscious thing. And I think that's what she's doing here. But I still think that this is a work that's infused with her own sense of self and selfhood. I was very interested in that and perplexed why she wanted to distance herself in that way.
Yeah, she was very, very pointed about that it wasn't about her. What do you think? Do you think it was more autobiographical than she let on?
Even though she says that she got it from so many people and it's all of these memories culminated into one book, it's also that it's from her perception of the whole thing. So she writes other people's memories, but the way she imagines them. So I think she puts a lot of herself in this book, of course. But like she says, I believe that it was a lot of people's lives all in one.
But also, I want to add that on every single action of our lives, there's a lot of subconscious or unconscious situations that get filtered through, like the conscious level, and that transpire with whatever decision or the way that we behave and conduct ourselves through life.
And the good writers, the good artists can tap into that and obviously
definitely.
make it work as she has done with the house on Mango Street. A lot of joyous moments there, and they're also juxtaposed against horrifying moments. She does a great job of putting together a mosaic of different stories and sort of making them fall in line in a very artful way. I think, is there any part of that really didn't ring true with you? Did it seem like a natural progression, one part of the story cycle to another?
Yeah, I think it did. I think she did a really good job just making everything, like the events follow each other. I think it made a lot of sense the way she put it together, and I think it was really true to nature.
to her and to nature. Our time is up, unfortunately. I feel like we've only scratched the surface, but what a great book. Cecilia Garcia Garza, thanks for joining us here today. Sarita Perez, thanks for being with us. And Wayne Stingle, thanks for your input as well. The book is this one, The House on Mango Street. As it's noted on the book, it's taught from everything from grade school classes up to university level. You might want to pick it up and find out why it's been so universally popular. Thanks for joining us today on the Same Page.